And if my American English is a little strange or too much at times, please raise your hand and I'll go a little slower, or I'll try to speak with a British accent instead. And then, but in any event, there's a lot of feedback. So maybe if I just speak from here, people can hear anyway. I think it's the metal plate in my head when I get close. Yeah. Well, how's that? Can you still hear me? Yeah. Oh, okay. I actually don't have a metal plate, but anyway. Welcome, and I just came from France, where I live, and I also was in Finland last week, speaking before groups of people like you, and I have to say I always admire the energy and effort that you show to show up here and to be educated, and also, frankly, to educate me, because I'm always learning something from these events. I'm Scott Tibbs. I'm the president of the National Health Federation, and I'm, whether you know it or not, I'm your representative at Codex meetings, because of all the health freedom organizations, only our organization, the National Health Federation, has the right to sit in and participate actively at these Codex Alimentarius meetings. And if you don't know what Codex is, just stay tuned and I'll explain as we go along. But what I wanted to start out with is kind of another approach, and that is to tell you that as we sit here right now, there's actually a cure for cancer that exists right this moment. There's been a researcher named Dr. Yamamoto who, since the 1990s, early 1990s, he's been actually defeating cancer. He's been curing cancer cases, although he would hate me to use this word, through once-weekly injections of a substance that has no side effects, and he uses thin diabetic-grade needles. The substance is just 1 nanogram, 1/1000th of a gram of this substance, and given over a 30 to 60 week period, it depends. And he gives it to breast cancer patients or subjects, he gives it to colon cancer subjects or patients, gives it to prostate cancer patients, and he's never had a failure, not one. And this has not been going on since last Tuesday, so it'd be easy to say no failures. This has been going on since 1991, 1992. So no failures, very few side effects, definitely no side effects actually, very definitely cheaper than the usual cut, poison, or burn technique that others use, that conventional approach. And it's just costs maybe about $10,000 US for a course of treatments. The problem is that he's only, and what you'll hear if you research this, is that he actually, it's not commercially available except maybe in a Mexican clinic or so, but there are ways to mimic the substance, and the substance is called GCMAF. The MAF stands for Macrophage Activating Factor. Everyone in this room, you seem to all be healthy, has 2 immune systems. You have the innate immune system, you have the acquired immune system. And the innate immune system, the one with the macrophages, is your first responder to the scene of any problem you have, like a pathogen, a virus, a bacteria, a cancer cell that's going crazy. And the macrophage, here's a photo of a macrophage actually eating a cancer cell. But the problem, the reason that we have cancers in this world, is because the macrophage system cannot always defeat a cancer cell, because cancer cells exude this enzyme called nagalase, and the enzyme deactivates the macrophages and stops them in their tracks. So what this very clever Japanese researcher discovered is that by giving this injection of GCMAF, excuse me, it's like reinforcements for the army, and it overwhelms the defensive system of the cancer cell, which then encourages all the macrophages to do exactly what you're seeing in this photo, that is, eating up the cancer cell. That's one reason it works. The other immune system that we have, the acquired immune system, is one that you get by getting childhood diseases, and then you get antibodies, or you get a vaccination, or something, or in that manner antibody. The problem is that the conventional approach, the alternative to what I just showed you, it kills. Now I'm using US statistics here. I'm sorry, I don't have Swedish statistics, but there'll be something on the same order of magnitude. So in the US you have about 800,000 deaths, actually more than that, per year from properly licensed, medically approved doctors, medical board approved doctors. And then you'll have another 127,000, I just put it down a little bit lower, but on average it averages out to about 127,000 deaths per year from properly approved, prescribed, or over-the-counter drugs. Just ibuprofen alone kills 17,000 Americans a year taking ibuprofen, the over-the-counter, headache reliever. And then from ordinary food, you'll get another 5,000 deaths a year. So keep this all in mind as we go through this, what I hope to be a conversation between us and among us about Codex and about the European Union's Food Supplements Directive, about the hype over the swine flu virus and the like. So these are the figures. In America alone, you have almost 1 million people a year being killed by all these properly regulated, supposedly properly regulated professions, hospitals, doctors, and drugs. Now I don't expect you to see this, this chart. It's really more for the visual effect. It's even hard for me to read it from here, but at the very top, the line that goes farthest to the right is telling you the number of deaths, and these are all the risks relative to dying compared with a flight in a Boeing 747. So down up at the top, are the risks associated with drugs and with properly approved doctors and the like. Just below it is the risk from dying from smoking, your smoking risk. As you go on down, there are risks of dying from doctors and the like, the rate of dying. So just imagine, go to the very bottom, and that's really where I want your attention to be relative to the rest. And the very bottom item is your risk of being hit by a meteorite. You're walking around and your risk of dying from being hit by a meteorite. Just above that is your risk of dying from taking a vitamin or mineral supplement. That's how low it, just above that is your risk of dying from a bee sting or a lightning strike. So your risk of dying from taking a vitamin supplement in Sweden or the US or Great Britain or Finland or wherever you might be is somewhere on the order of between being hit by a meteorite or being struck by lightning. That's how dangerous it is. And yet all these medical authorities are trying to suppress dietary supplements and other natural remedies like homeopathy and other things because of this huge risk that they pose. And they always tell you, and they'll tell you till they're blue in the face, that they're doing this to protect you from yourself. But in reality, what they're really doing is they're trying to protect their business. They're trying to protect you from the competition. So natural products are very, very safe. In the US, again, during a 23-year period, they could only account for somewhere on the order of about 10 deaths from vitamin supplements, and even that's questionable. The wildest claim says 75 during a 23-year period. So again, far safer than being stung by a bee, being hit by lightning, or falling off a horse while you're horseback riding. And homeopathy is even safer. Martina will tell you that herself. She's a homeopath. But the side effects are virtually non-existent, and the efficacy has been proven over quite a period of time. So we have something where natural remedies work, and they've been shown to work, and they use natural substances that, for the most part, natural substances that we've grown up with or evolved with over millennia. In this case, GCMAF may not fit exactly that bill because they synthesized and extracted it to make a very concentrated source. But it is very effective for AIDS and for cancer. What I told you about it working on cancer applies equally to working for the HIV virus. Then you have a substance like ionic silver, colloidal silver, which is just a silver ion in suspension. And that is very effective for killing viruses and bacteria and gram-negative pathogens. You either take it topically or you take it orally. You know, this is the same sort of thing that they give to newborn babies in their eyes to prevent blindness, so it's incredibly safe, just as long as you take it within limits. Selenium is very important for helping prevent AIDS infection, attacking viruses and the like. You find it very hard to get in a typical Swedish diet unless you eat macadamia, unless you eat Brazil nuts. And otherwise, the soil in Sweden is very deficient in selenium. Most of the soils in Northern Europe are deficient in selenium. So to get it in your diet, you either have to get it from food products that come from the US or Canada, the central part, or you eat Brazil nuts, or you take it as a supplement, about 200 micrograms per day. But the real winner in this whole list, if I may say, besides the GCMAF perhaps, is the natural vitamin D. This is something that really mimics that GCMAF, or a large part, and it hypes up your immune system to make it stronger, to make it resistant to the flu, to make it resistant to cancer. They found that women who take adequate levels of vitamin D, and again, I'm talking natural vitamin D, not the synthetic form. You want the vitamin D3, not the synthetic form D2. And by the way, I'm here, I don't work for a company, we're a consumer organization. I buy these things just like you would. So I'm not here because some company sent me here. I'm here because I really believe in these products, and I've taken them myself over the years. But natural vitamin D, which is very hard to come by in Sweden this time of year, even if you eat fish, is vitally important, because this is what protects your, gets your immune system going to protect you from the flu. So if you're interested and you're here because you're worried about the influenza virus or anything of that sort, this is one thing you want to be sure to take. Magnesium, omega-3s, oils for combating depression is important. And believe it or not, resveratrol, the active ingredient, one of the active ingredients in red wine, is very important as well. But if you get it from a bottle of red wine, you need to know that within 24 hours of opening that bottle, the active ingredients are all disappeared unless you put it in a refrigerator. Then you have about 3 days. So you can probably get about 1 milligram of resveratrol. But resveratrol has been shown to actually reset your genetic switches to a more youthful fashion. In other words, as we get older, some of our genes turn on and then others turn off. And resveratrol has been shown, and I've even seen the gene array studies myself done at the University of Wisconsin in Madison in the United States, where I saw the mouse tissue studies that they did that showed all the genes that had been flipped to a more youthful state. And it was incredible. Resveratrol does that, as does calorie-deficient diet, but then you just seem to want to live longer, I guess, or it seems like life is longer if you don't have food to eat. So I recommend resveratrol over the calorie-restricted diet. The problem is all these things do things that the drugs do, or don't do quite as well. The drugs are not quite as good. But so the big pharmaceutical companies that have a lot of profits are making from this, they want to suppress these alternative therapies, whether it's homeopathy, whether it's dietary supplements, or whether it's Reiki healers, you name it. They aren't interested in it, and they have a big campaign in the press and lobbying groups to convince the world that they don't need any of these things. But how do they really work? In a true free market, it would be our ideas of what we want competing against their ideas, and whichever most interested the consumer would win out. But when they see that we're winning, which we are actually, then they do the time-honored tradition of running to the government to get laws passed or regulations passed to suppress the competition. You see this in the United States, you see this in the European Union, you name it, that's what they do. So how do they do that? They use government agencies. So if you think, and one of my main messages to you tonight is if you think government agencies are working on behalf of you, you're wrong. They don't. They work on behalf of the companies that captured them. There's a whole theme behind this that was popularized, wasn't popularized, but at least was mentioned by very deep thinker in the US about 45 years ago who said, you know, this is what happens. The agencies that are meant to regulate these particular industries end up getting captured by the very agency, very industry members that they're intended to regulate. I mean, just think about it. For the Swedish Food Agency, I mean, that's only a small part of your life, you know. You have other things to do. You go shopping, you have school perhaps, you have your work, you have family, you go on vacation, you have to deal with your automobile, maybe there are automobile issues, I don't know, maybe taking the subway, other things, art, painting. But for food, even though it's important, it's really just a small percentage of your life and a small percentage of your focus. But for a drug company that's going to have its drug approved, that can make the difference between life and death for that company. So that's why in the US, they spend $6 million each and every day to lobby the US congressmen and women there and to lobby the agencies because they want to make sure that their products are still on the market. And most of these smaller natural companies that sell, say, natural vitamin D, well, they don't have a patent on it, so they can't protect their little market niche. Once they get approval by any agency, then anyone in this room could go and sell it. So the financial incentive isn't the same. They don't have a monopoly over a particular drug, like Prozac, or a drug like ibuprofen had a patent for a long time. They don't have a patent over that. So they want to protect their market niche, and they do this by capturing the agencies themselves. So truth number one, I would say, is that these agencies don't work for you. You may think they do, but they work for commercial and financial interests that they are supposedly to regulate. So these agencies become a tool for eliminating competition. And in my experience, I've only found that they will be responsive to the public if there's a concerted, a concentrated effort by a group of individuals working intensely together to put pressure on them. Then and only then will they respond to you. And so, excuse me while I take a sip of water here. We come to the ultimate prize that they like to capture, because these agencies in all these different countries represent a lot of money, time, and energy and effort. And it's kind of difficult to run around to all these different countries and capture them. And so why not go to the ultimate prize, which is the big daddy, which is Codex Alimentarius. The Codex Alimentarius Commission, for how many of you know already what Codex Alimentarius is? Could you let me know so I know whether I'm okay? Well, most of you, she has her arms folded, so she's hedging her bets. But most of you do know. But just to help some of you who don't, this is an international body that was created under the auspices of the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Health Organization to create international standards, and actually had, well, maybe I'll get to that later, but it's considered to be a template for the creation of other standards in other areas, not just food. But this one just deals with food, but what they want to do is that their regulations, their standards actually want to be implemented domestically, not just internationally, not just between trade. So why bother going to all these different agencies if you can capture Codex Alimentarius? There are, within the Codex Alimentarius process, there's the commission, which meets alternate years, and I go to these meetings, and I've been going to these meetings for over 10 years now. And the organization itself has been sending someone there for about 16 years at this point. And we are the only organization, as I mentioned, that has a seat at the Codex table, meaning we can talk out at the meetings. We have a microphone like this. We can interact in real time with the other delegates, and we can present papers for consideration by the committee, by the various committees. Now, underneath the commission are, at this point, about 27 different committees. And these committees deal with different issues, like the Fish and Fishery Products Committee is one, and that's hosted by the government of Norway, and it meets once a year, either in Norway or a place selected by Norway. The committee that we're most interested in has a very long name, an acronym called CCNFSDU, Codex Committee on Nutrition and Foods for Special Dietary Uses, and that's the one I started going to in Berlin in the year 2000, and it's hosted by Germany. The German government hosts it, which is probably the worst country to host a nutrition committee, but they do. And this is tasked with formulating a standard for vitamin and mineral food supplements and for other things, infant baby formulas and things of that sort. So these are the kind of committees, examples of the committees that are there. We also go to the Codex Committee on Food Labeling in Canada. We go to the Codex Committee on General Principles that meets in Paris. We have a representative right now at the Codex Committee on Food Hygiene that's meeting in the US. That sort of thing. But the one that really captures our focus is the one in Canada on food labeling, because it's the one that's going to tell everyone about what you're eating. And that will be, on cans like this and tell you what's in the can. And the other is the nutrition one, which we've had knockdown, drag-out fights with the chairman there at the meeting, because we're extremely outspoken at these meetings, and they don't really care for us too much there, because we'll actually argue with the EC representative, the European Commission representative, and the American representative, the two probably worst delegates there. At least they were during the mid-2000s. Now this picture is of the FAO Building, where the Commission meets in alternate years there in Rome. And this is a photo I took myself when I went to that meeting in July. So just to give you an idea, there's the UN flag flying over it. And inside, you'll see what it looks like. So I really want you to feel what it's like to be there. And so I'll explain a little bit more, maybe more detail than you want. But when you leave here, you should have a real feeling and understanding as to what it's like to be in these meetings, short of going to one yourself. So you see in this photo, this is the meeting hall in that FAO building that I showed you. Excuse me. And in the center, if you can spot him, is standing the chairman of the Codex Committee on Nutrition and Foods for Special Dietary Uses. A gentleman named Dr. Rolf Grossklaus, and he's the one I have a lot of arguments with on the meeting floor. He's right in the center facing us and looking our way. It looks like he has a mohawk, but he really doesn't. He just has graying hair and then a shaka hair in the center, unlike me. But this was taken from our vantage point at these meetings. Usually, these meetings are very crowded. They're usually 200 or 300 delegates, and the way it works is you start with the country delegation, starting with, say, Albania in the beginning, and going alphabetically through the room to Zimbabwe. So the Swedish delegate will be there and have her chair, in alphabetical order. But usually the Swedish delegate won't speak out. Very rarely have I heard her speak out. Almost always it's the EC representative, because you're represented by the European Commission there, not by Sweden. Now, in private meetings, the Swedish delegate may or may not talk with the EC representative. I'm not privy to those meetings, so I don't know exactly what goes on in them. But in general, the EC representative will speak out. Occasionally, the other countries will speak out. Then behind the country delegates, and by the way, these are all bureaucrats. They aren't really normal people like you and me. They're people who have a job and they're interested in safety only, not in health freedom, not in whether people really get well, but protecting their job. And if someone dies on their watch, then that's a bad thing. So they have a vested interest in making sure there are a lot of rules and regulations to make sure no one gets hurt. But, what's the good of that if you live life with handcuffs on and in a straitjacket and tied up with a rope and in a closet in a room that's locked as well? What kind of life is that? You can protect people till they go to their grave, but it doesn't let them enjoy life. And that's part of the problem I see with Codex process. They want to make people safe, but they're so exceedingly careful and cautious about it, if that's their real agenda, that they actually are ruining people's lives, and they're actually inadvertently killing a lot of people by not making available things that will really heal and not hurt them. In other words, in terms of preferring drugs over food, they're actually hurting people. Even though they may save a few lives over here, they actually kill hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of people on the other side of the equation. So behind the bureaucrats are the INGOs, the International Non-Governmental Organizations. And these are the people like me who go and can speak out, and you have to be accredited by Codex to do it. But I'd say maybe 80–85% of these people, the INGOs, are representing commercial interests, like the World Sugar Research Organization, or the acacia gum people called Aid Gum. So they're there for their own special niche market, and that's it. Only a handful, literally about a handful, represent consumers. I think Consumers International is there at some of the meetings, not all. There's an obscure Canadian-American organization called the 49th Parallel. That's the border, the parallel that divides Canada from the US. The 49th Parallel Bio-Consortium Continuum. It sounds like some sort of Star Trek name. And they are there. And then the Infant Baby Formula Action Network, they go. And they're mainly interested in the infant baby formulas, of course, as you can gather from their name. So they attend these meetings, but usually we sit down with this crowd that you see of the bureaucrats down there, just slightly behind them. And then what you have also at the front in the podium are the chairman or the chairwoman and the staff around him or her, and including usually a representative of the FAO and a representative of the WHO. And then occasionally, but very rarely, you do have members of the public that attend. You could actually go in and sit in on a meeting. You couldn't participate, you could just observe, but it is possible. The press is almost never there. These meetings are done in obscurity, so they are not things that, that I would say happen often, that is being reported on, other than alternative press and websites such as Bakken.se. So I would say that actually Codex is a really noble concept, but it's, and the concept, by the way, is that one, to protect consumers' health, that's noble. The second thing is to facilitate free trade, to remove all international trade barriers to the sale and distribution of food. That's also noble. But it's really an elitist agenda that they're pushing here. And it's not pro-natural remedies, it's really anti, and it's pro-drug instead, and it's all about control. It's all about top-down, giving orders to people and consumers as to what they can do and what they can't do. But one of the most dangerous things, actually, is even if it were a good system, it's very slow to react to change. And with the doubling time in knowledge, with the knowledge of humans increasing logarithmically, at least geometrically, by the time they passed a standard that's taken them 5 years to pass, we're already into the 22nd century, just about. I mean, they're still debating the gas standards, the gas lighting standards, while we're doing cold power fusion. So that is a huge problem, because even with the best of intentions, even if you assume they're good people, all of them, there's a problem with the standards that they reach. They're too old and too outdated by the time they come into place. And I've seen that myself in these meetings where these people come up, some of the delegates actually, like the Canadian delegate one time, came up with the latest information, but it was all basically shouted down because it wasn't from the FAO, WHO, which had come out about 5 years ago. So this woman from Canada was basically told, forget it, even though she had information from this year. And so I spoke up on her behalf and said, she has the most recent information, we should be going with that. No, we can only go with FAO, WHO data, and that's it. And the problem is, a lot of it's based upon junk science. It's not even good science. And when I talk about this, by the way, everything I'm saying about Codex, except the fact that it's global, could apply to the European Food Supplements Directive here in the EU, and what's taking effect by the end of this next month. So be aware of it, because a lot of this, and the European Union's Food Supplements Directive, is really based upon junk, what a lot of us call junk science. You know, they apply these scientific terms of risk assessment, risk management, risk analysis, but all it really is this toxicological model applied to natural products, things that we've evolved with over millennia, you know, vitamins and minerals and natural nutrients that that should be treated differently. And that's part of the problem, because the system, the continental European system, is one that everything is forbidden except that which is allowed. And that's the exact opposite of the Anglo-American system, or at least the way it used to be, where everything that is not specifically prohibited is allowed. That's a much greater universe, so you actually have to go out and track down what's wrong, and then you allow it. So you have a lot more freedom of action. Now this is a cartoon that shows actually how a lot of these dietary supplement companies are welcoming with open arms these Codex guidelines, because they think, the bigger ones think, we can sell, oh good, we can sell a lot of vitamins and supplements throughout the world, but there are all these kind of Fred Flintstone vitamin and supplements that are not meant to really heal. They're low potency, low dosage vitamins, and they're just good to help make you feel like you're doing something, but they aren't good for actually helping heal you or give you optimal health. So these guidelines are going to come back, what this is essentially saying, it's going to come back and bite the very industry that thinks it's being helped by this. But these standards that are being created, these ones that are being created upon junk science, they not only deal with vitamin and mineral food guidelines, and they're trying to suppress the levels, the potencies of these, so that you couldn't get enough vitamin D, for example, to protect yourself from the flu. You couldn't get enough selenium to protect yourself from viruses. You won't be able to get enough you know, B6 or some of the other things you need to prevent birth defects. So these guidelines are coming into effect, not at the end of this year, but sometime in the near future. And then we also have the GM food labeling issue. This is a critical thing that we've been fighting in the Canadian meetings. And this is where, actually at this stage, the EC representative and the NHF representative, us, work together, because we want the consumer to be informed about genetically modified food if it's in a container. We think the consumer should know whether it's GM food or not. Unfortunately, the Canadian, the American, the Mexican, the Argentinian, the Costa Rican, the Australian and New Zealand representatives think you shouldn't be informed. They think the consumer is too stupid to understand the difference between GM food and non-GM food, and they think you'll make a mistake. In fact, the American representative told me herself, she said, the consumer is too ignorant to know the difference, and they'll make the wrong choice. They'll think GM food is bad for them. So that's why she says she's fighting to oppose GM food labeling, so you won't know. But actually the real reason is, of course, that they're controlled, they're captured. All of these, what I call the Western Hemispheric states, except for Brazil, they export grains, you know, all these GM foods, corn and soybeans and the like, to the rest of the world, and they want to protect their market niche. They want to protect their GM food crops from being stopped at the European Union's borders or in African countries or Asian countries or the like. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of these countries are wise to it, the European community being one of them. And even Zimbabwe, as poor and as starved as it was refusing GM soy products that were being donated to it, and perhaps for good reason. I won't go into the debate on GM foods, but it's not important other than the fact that the consumer should be informed, in our opinion, should be informed and should be able to make an informed choice. So that's another thing that we're fighting for. But at the Codex level, there are certain agencies that don't want this to happen. But interestingly enough, the last two items on the list, the NHF is the only one fighting to eliminate aspartame and aluminum-containing food additives from food. We're the only ones. This committee meets in China, in in Beijing, and I argued till I was blue in my face that aspartame is dangerous. They all were too polite to laugh, but essentially laughed. And then melamine, I don't know how much you know about melamine, but this was the food contaminant, I would call it, that was added in by the Chinese to beef up their protein content in pet foods. And you may have read the story about a year or so ago, 2 years ago, where cats and dogs in Canada and the US were dying because they ate this food and it was poisonous because it had melamine in it. Because for a few pennies, a few centimes, they could add melamine in, and then when it was tested, it showed a very high protein content. Oh, this must be good. It has a high protein content, what we need for cats and dogs. And then they had to withdraw it from the market, of course. And then the same with infant baby formulas. The Chinese were putting it into infant baby formulas as well, and it was hurting, and in some cases, killing infants. So at the Codex Committee meeting on contaminants in food, they want to set a level for contamination that we think is quite high, and we were the only ones to speak out against it. Everyone else thought these high levels were fine. So this is a big mystery to us, so we are battling on your behalf and on our own to fight these high levels. We think it should be zero, actually, because you actually deliberately add melamine in. It's not like a packaging contaminant that then causes this problem. You have to deliberately want to add it in. So at the most recent meeting, this is one that was just literally 14 days ago, there in Dusseldorf in Germany was the Codex, the CCNF-SDU meeting. If you remember your acronyms, you'll remember what that stands for. And this was actually a museum, and as I said in an article I wrote on it, it's where every art is revered except that of gastronomy. And this is the inside, a little bit smaller room than the other one. And this was at a working group meeting that was held on Halloween Day, actually, and then it led into the regular meeting that followed in the full week after. So I don't know if you can read this or not, but this is a particular document that was pushed at this meeting, and we had a huge victory. So I'm happy to tell you about this victory. It may not seem like much, but it actually means a lot. And the victory is this. This document was circulated around, and this document being, I have to take off my glasses for this, sorry. Proposed draft, additional or revised nutrient reference values for labeling purposes in the Codex Guidelines on Nutrition Labeling. Well, that'll put anyone to sleep. But, you know, bureaucrats love this kind of wording. And anyway, within it, they have something that's very important. They have a list of vitamins, the main vitamins and minerals, and then they have what would be the nutrient reference value. And what this means is basically the recommended daily intake. This is when you look at a label on a food, if you look at a label on a food, many people don't, but there are enough who do, and it says vitamin C, 60 milligrams, 100% of your recommended daily intake. This is what you're looking at, and this is what concerns nutrient reference values. So these morons, oh, I'm sorry, I'm insulting morons. These people wanted to reduce, in this case, vitamin C, the nutrient reference value, what would be deemed to be 100%. They wanted to knock it down from 60 milligrams to 45 milligrams, because they thought 60 was too much. Well, you know, someone was smoking outside as I entered this building, and just that one cigarette will destroy, in the average typical cigarette, 60 milligrams of vitamin C. So if you're a smoker and you smoke one cigarette, you've destroyed 60 milligrams, which is the minimum amount here, what they consider to be the recommended amount. Well, this is ridiculous. You need far, far more than 60 milligrams a day for optimal health. 60 milligrams is what sailors would take to keep from dropping dead of scurvy at sea, not what keeps you healthy and free from disease. You actually probably need about 10 times, 100 times that amount, excuse me, to be safe and healthy. But even that low amount of 60 milligrams, they want to drop down to 45 milligrams. Then they want to chop niacin from 18 milligrams to 15. Vitamin D doesn't have a value yet, so that's still up in the air. They wanted to reduce magnesium from 300 milligrams down to 240 milligrams, which is also ludicrous. But get this, on the back page, nope, don't have the back page. The back page is fluoride, and they wanted to have it at a high level, 3.5 milligrams. Well, fluoride's a poison. It displaces selenium in your body. So yet they're perfectly content to keep fluoride in here. You'd think they're up to something if they're trying to do this. So this was going to sail through the committee, and there was a small protest, very minor protest from Costa Rica that just said, well, we think the value on vitamin A is too low, because for vitamin A, they have dropped it from 800 micrograms to 550 micrograms. And so Costa Rica made a little comment like that, which would mean nothing, actually. The committee would ignore it. The way it works is, unless you're persistently vocal, you can't stop anything. So you have to be persistent about it. And so just saying, oh, this doesn't look good to me, and then being quiet won't stop a document like this from going through the process. And by the way, there are 8 steps that they go through. So this started at step 1, and it was at step 2 or 3. And as it goes through the step process, the language gets more and more fixed, set in stone, set in cement, and you can't change it. So it's really important to stop the process right then and there before it got too far along and all these values were fixed and set in stone. So I had the floor after Costa Rica. And I think, well, actually, there were a few other delegations that might have spoken first, because the countries get to speak first, then the INGO. So I had to wait patiently, or rather impatiently, while these other 2, maybe 3 delegations spoke. Then it was my turn, and I said, basically, I really wanted to say something much harsher, but I said, these figures are outrageous. This is ridiculous. It's going to make the Codex Committee look like fools and idiots because of this, and it'll be a public relations nightmare for Codex, because I knew the chairman didn't like Codex to look bad. He wants Codex to look good. That's why they spend a lot of money promoting Codex and doing videos and films on it, because they know organizations like ours are speaking out against the Codex process, at least the way it's being pushed now. Anyway, I said these figures are way too low. 60 milligrams should be raised, not lowered. And so I kept pushing on this. The Australian delegate then took the floor after me, and we ended up having a duel, verbal duel. And she said, well, these figures are what FAO and WHO has worked out. And so we should stay with them. And besides, a little to have this gives us an extra degree of comfort, an extra degree of protection is what she's talking about. Anyway, to make a long story short, this argument back and forth went on for a considerable period of time. I got a little support, believe it or not, from the Iraqi delegate, who was very nice. He chipped in, but it was his first meeting, so he didn't say too much, just something short. And then the chairman actually said, well, because he sensed how much I was fighting on this, and surprised me by saying, well, maybe we should hold this document back. So I was sitting there, praying to God with crossed fingers, saying, well, I hope no one says anything against this, but sure enough, there were others speaking out against it. And then I spoke again. I probably spoke out on this topic about 10 times during those exchanges. And they got tired of hearing me. I think he was finally, excuse me, I think he was finally very frustrated. He said, let's hold it back. And then fortunately, India, God bless their soul, took the floor and said, we agree with NHF, we think it should be held back. And that's all it took for the chairman. He said, we're going to hold it back. Boom. And so he held back the document. So we'll have the battle next year, in a year's time, when we meet again in Chile. But at least we stopped this document this time, and we'll have a chance to build our alliances and to come up with science to refute this kind of idiot science. Because when you think about it, it may not seem like a big thing, but when the average person goes out and looks at a label and says, I'm getting 100% of my vitamin C, what is he or she really doing? They're getting a small portion of what they think they need. So instead of eating a healthy diet, they're getting a very unhealthy diet, because then they think it's fine to then go drink their Coca-Cola, to eat their McDonald's hamburger, or whatever they do, and not get adequate intake of nutrition, to get a nutritionally non-dense diet. So again, on the screen are some documents that the Codex puts out. But they also have a strategic plan, and there are people out there who believe it, that say, well, Codex is only to be applied internationally. Well, actually, it's already to a large extent being applied within certain countries, including the EC, because the vitamin and mineral food supplements guideline was modeled after the European Union's food supplement directive. That's why the EC representative was fighting so hard to get it just right, the Codex one, because he wanted it to be just like the European Union's food supplements directive. But it will still, I wanted to show you this, because this is actually the Codex strategic plan, the latest one that they put out for the years 2008 to 2013. And in it, they actually, and you probably won't be able to read that, but they actually mention that they will apply Codex domestically. They say in here, and I'll just cut to the chase, the Commission will develop internationally agreed standards and related texts for use in domestic regulation and international trade in food. And that continues to say that are based on scientific principles and the like. So their agenda is to actually create these standards that will then be applied not only internationally, but in Sweden and the United States and the like. And what they want to do is dumb down the levels of vitamin mineral supplements to a level where it will not help you. And here again is some other language in that same book that I just showed you. So a lot of you are already familiar with what's going on here in the EU. This is written maybe more for an American audience, but the European Union's Food Supplements Directive started taking effect July 31, 2005. And it's finally being fully implemented at the end of December next month. So what we have is a situation, and you're seeing this in Sweden, because the most liberal countries that I've seen in the European Union for selling supplements and natural alternatives is Ireland, Great Britain, the Netherlands, and Sweden. You know, the harshest are like Denmark and Norway and Germany. France too, to a large extent, although they usually just ignore the rules and regulations there anyway. But what it does is, as I said, it matches these European Union Food Supplements Directive, matches the Codex Vitamin Mineral Food Guidelines. Not entirely, but pretty closely. And the goal, again, is to suppress natural remedies that you would be interested in, that would actually heal. In the US, there's a lot more freedom, there's a lot more protection, and that's courtesy of this first legislative item that's mentioned there, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994, passed 15 years ago, and basically took away the arbitrary powers of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to just go in and remove whatever products it wanted. Once that happened, it didn't mean that the market was unregulated, which is what you're going to hear. Oh, the unregulated market in the United States. Well, that's false and wrong, and they know it's wrong, because there are all sorts of laws in effect to protect consumers. If you lie about a product, if you cheat, if you misbrand it, if you don't tell the truth about what's in that product, you can be put in prison, basically. Fined, put in prison, sent off to jail, and the like. It's definitely regulated. But it's just not regulated the way the power seekers want to regulate it, with total control. So the beauty of Deshay was that it unleashed all this creativity, all this freedom, and that's why in the US you see about 1,000 new products a year coming out in the health industry. 1,000. And in fact, so much so that actually some of the big vitamin companies that originally supported this law 15 years ago are now kind of hoping to rein it in a bit, because they didn't realize that these small and medium-sized companies would be created as competition to them. So now what they want to do is create more burdensome regulations where you have to prove all these things. You have to test all the products, even though they've been tested many times before, the subject of studies. And that will increase the cost of entering into the marketplace and keep out all these smaller businesses. The bad law that just came into effect is the Food Safety Act of 2009, and this will give the federal government total control over the food supply, even if it's grown in someone's own backyard, and especially over organic food. Anyway, we won't take the time to go into it, but what it's all leading to is creating a North American Union, the harmonization of Canada's laws with those of the United States and with those of Mexico. It started just like it did here in Europe with an economic agreement, but it starts there in North America with the North American Free Trade Agreement. It's led into the Central American Free Trade Agreement. The Central American Free Trade Agreement specifically refers to Codex in its language, which a lot of other agreements like the SPS, the sanitary and phytosanitary agreements, and the technical barriers to trade agreements refer to. And then it leads down to these tri-country working groups. MUCH is just an acronym for Mexico, United States, and Canada Health. But believe it or not, using these groups together, they're headed towards a definition of health fraud that they want to use in North America, and that also, I suspect, will be used here, and in some countries is already being used. That if you read the last line that's highlighted, says anything that basically provides a beneficial effect on health is a health fraud. And that's what they're leading to in all the member countries of Codex, is just this. And there are 182 member countries in Codex. It represents 99% of the world's population. So basically, health fraud is defined as something that provides a beneficial effect on health. Can you believe that? How outrageous is that? So if you eat an apple and it provides a beneficial effect on health, and you make a statement to that effect, you're committing health fraud. So truth number 2.
Was that their wording? Or?
That is their wording. That is the wording in the United States and Canada and Mexico as part of this MUCH group that they're putting into effect. So truth.
Say an apple a day keeps the doctor when you go to jail?
Yep, you could. In theory, they'd probably just warn you first. Second time, they'd probably fine you. Besides taking away all your apples. And
they can try, brother. They can try.
Good for you. They can try. But the point I want to get to is you find this problem wherever you have great centralization of power, because you think about it. Who's attracted to power the most? It's not ordinary people like us. I mean, it's not basically good people, honest people. It's the power seekers. It's the one who, almost sociopaths and psychopaths that get attracted like moths to a flame to power. And the more power you have, the more concentration of power, whether it's in Brussels or Washington, D.C. or Moscow, I don't care where it is, the more psychopaths and sociopaths you have go there. And they can look like normal people, and they can talk normal language, just like anyone else, but in reality, what the people are, they're power seekers. So you want to break down the government and diffuse the power as much as possible. I mean, that was the beauty of the original concept of the United States of America, was that it was very decentralized power. The main power holders was not Washington, D.C., it was the various states. You were known as a Virginian or a New Yorker or a New Hampshire person. You were not known as an American. And in fact, once I had this funny experience when I went to university at Sorbonne in Paris. And I went out with some other students for a coffee or tea late at night. And there was a Frenchman, an old guy with a cigarette kind of dangling off the lower lip. And he saw us over there, and he's probably attracted to the good-looking woman that was with us. And he said, sort of sneered at us, and he said, you're Americans, right? And we said, yes, we are. And he said, your country, it doesn't even have a name. And I said, yes, it does. It's the United States of America. He said, that's not a name, that's a description. A name is like France or England or Sweden. That's a name of a country. And, I started to say something, and I thought about it, and I thought, he's right. It is. It's just a description. But why is that? Well, it's because it was meant to be a decentralized government. You know, the average American up until the start of the American Civil War in 1860 had virtually no contact with the federal government in Washington, D.C., unless he or she went to the post office and mailed a letter, and then they came in contact with the U.S. government post office. That was it. They had contact with the local government, the county, the city, or the state. That was it, because you were known as a Texan, you were known as a Californian, you were known as a Georgian or Floridian, not as an American. So that was the original concept. Now you see the United States is flipped totally on its head, and everything is centralized. That's one reason America's doing so many bad things now. You have all the power seekers going there. You have all the power-hungry people. I don't care who's the president. You have power seekers there, or the people behind them who are the power seekers running things. But they all forget that government isn't God. And this leads to the latest big hype, and I think Anna and some others were interested in this out in the audience, and that's about the swine flu vaccine, vaccinations in general and the like. This is another agenda that's going to be pushed, is being pushed, and is going to get a lot of people sick and ill, and already has. Actually, the death rate from the swine flu is pretty low when you compare it even to ordinary flu. More people have died from ordinary flu than from the swine flu. And it's intended to scare you, and there was a big media campaign to scare you into taking a vaccination. But you're more likely to die from that vaccination than you are from the swine flu itself. But the interesting thing, and I take you back to the beginning of my talk, is all these natural remedies that could actually protect you far better from the swine flu or any flu than that. Natural vitamin D, taking 4,000 or 5,000 international units a day. That helps protect you. Taking quercetin will help you. You know, during the plague, the Black Death in the Middle Ages in Europe, there were, you know, as you know, it spread throughout Europe except for a central part of Poland, and a third of the population in Europe died off from it. But there was an interesting thing where some criminals in Marseille were caught. They were very bad guys. I think they'd killed some people, and this is actually a true story, but they were condemned to death by the judges. But the city fathers thought, you know, we can put them to use before they die. Let's have them remove the pestilent-ridden bodies from the city streets to remove them to a remote location, and they'll die from the plague within maybe a week. But what they didn't realize is these guys had as a habit of drinking a glass or several glasses of red wine, raw red wine, very crude red wine, with mashed garlic, freshly mashed garlic in it. They were drinking this every day, and it protected them from the plague. And so here they were, removing bodies day after day, week after week, month after month, still living. The police died, the judges all died off, the city fathers died. You know, all of the others were dead. They were still alive, all, you know, happy as clams because they were still alive and hadn't been put to death. And this is the beauty and the benefit of some of these natural remedies that can help you. And I won't go into all the detail here because we might run out of time, but I want to point out one thing, which is homeopathy during the big Spanish flu epidemic in 1918, 1919, actually successfully treated flu far better than the allopathic form. The death rate from people treated allopathically was 30%, but the homeopathically treated patients only died at a 1 to 1.5% rate. That is, it was 98% successful. And I'm being stopped at this stage